The screams still echoed in Sophia Morgan's nightmares, 3 years after the fire took everything. But the snow falling on this January morning in 1878 had a way of making the world feel silent and new. She stood at the edge of Downieville, California, watching flakes settle on her gloved hands, covering the puckered scars that ran from her wrists to her elbows like twisted rivers on a map. The winter had come hard to the Sierra Nevada mountains this year, blanketing the gold rush town in white that transformed the muddy streets into something almost magical. Most folks stayed inside their cabins and boarding houses when the temperature dropped like this, but Sophia had learned that solitude was easier to find in the cold, and she craved it more than warmth. She had arrived in Downieville 3 weeks ago on the stagecoach from Sacramento, carrying nothing but a worn carpet bag and enough coin to rent a small room above the general store. The proprietor, Mrs. Chen, was a kind Chinese woman who had survived the worst of the mining camp prejudices and asked no questions about the scars Sophia kept hidden beneath long sleeves and high collars. The room was drafty and small, but it had a window that looked out over the snow-covered pines, and that was enough. Sophia pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders and started walking toward the edge of town where the forest began. Her boots crunched in the fresh snow, leaving tracks that would be filled within the hour if this storm kept up. She had come west to disappear, to find a place where nobody knew about the Philadelphia boarding house fire that had killed 12 people and left her with scars that made strangers stare and children point. The doctors had told her she was lucky to be alive, but luck felt like a cruel word when you woke up screaming most nights and couldn't bear to look at your own reflection. The pine trees stood tall and dark against the white sky, their branches heavy with snow. Sophia had walked this path every morning since arriving, finding peace in the rhythm of her footsteps and the quiet of the wilderness. She had just reached her favorite spot, a small clearing where a frozen creek cut through the landscape, when she heard the sound of hoofbeats behind her. She turned to see a rider emerging from the swirling snow, tall in the saddle on a dark bay horse. He wore a wide-brimmed hat crusted with ice and a heavy coat that marked him as someone who spent his days outdoors. As he drew closer, she instinctively pulled her sleeves down further, tucking her hands into her shawl even though her gloves already covered the worst of the damage. The rider slowed his horse as he approached, and Sophia got her first clear look at him. He was young, probably not much older than her own 22 years, with a strong jaw shadowed by several days of stubble and eyes the color of slate. There was something weathered about him despite his youth, as if the mountains had carved away anything soft and left only the essential parts. "Morning," he called out, his voice carrying easily across the snow-muffled distance. "You should not be out here alone. There are mountain lions in these woods, especially when the snow gets deep and they get hungry." Sophia straightened her spine, bristling at the assumption that she needed protecting. "I have been walking here every day since I arrived. I have not seen any mountain lions. That does not mean they have not seen you." He swung down from his horse with an easy grace, landing in the snow with barely a sound. Up close, he was even taller than she had thought, easily over 6 feet with broad shoulders that strained against his coat. "Name is Quentin Crawford. I run cattle up in the high country during the summer, but I am down here for the winter." "Miss Morgan," Sophia said, keeping her response deliberately formal. She had no interest in making friends or drawing attention to herself. The whole point of coming to Downieville was to be left alone. Quentin studied her face for a long moment, and she fought the urge to turn away. Most people looked at her with pity or poorly concealed disgust once they noticed the scar that crept up the left side of her neck, just visible above her collar. But his expression remained neutral, almost thoughtful. "You are the one staying above Chen's store," he said. It was not a question. "Folks in town have been curious about you. We do not get many newcomers in the winter." "I prefer to keep to myself," Sophia said, hearing the sharp edge in her own voice. "If you will excuse me, I should get back before the storm gets worse." She started to move past him, but his next words stopped her cold. "The reason I came looking for you is that Mrs. Chen mentioned you might be interested in work. My mother runs a boarding house on the other side of town, and she is getting too old to manage it alone. She needs help with the cooking and cleaning, and it pays better than what most women can earn around here." Sophia's first instinct was to refuse. The last thing she wanted was to work in another boarding house, to smell the wood smoke, and hear the creak of old floorboards that would bring back memories of that terrible night. But her small savings would not last forever, and she had learned the hard way that a woman alone needed to be practical about survival. "I will think about it," she said carefully. Quentin nodded, seemingly satisfied with that answer. "The offer stands whenever you are ready. The place is called Crawford House. Anyone in town can point you in the right direction." He gathered his horse's reins and prepared to mount, then paused. "And Miss Morgan, those scars on your neck do not make you any less worth looking at. Just thought you should know." Before she could respond, he swung back into the saddle and rode off into the snow, leaving her standing alone in the clearing with her heart hammering against her ribs. Nobody had mentioned her scars so directly before, not since she left Philadelphia. Most people pretended not to see them, or stared when they thought she was not looking. But Quentin Crawford had acknowledged them as casually as he might mention the weather, without pity or judgment, and then said something that made heat flood her cheeks despite the cold. She stood there for several minutes after he disappeared, trying to sort through the tangle of emotions in her chest. Anger that he had presumed to comment on her appearance. Confusion about why his words had affected her so strongly. And underneath it all, a tiny flicker of something she had not felt in 3 years, something that might have been hope. The snow continued to fall as she made her way back to town, her thoughts churning. By the time she climbed the narrow stairs to her room above the general store, she had made a decision. She would go see this Crawford house and meet Quentin's mother. Not because of what he had said, she told herself firmly, but because she needed the work and could not hide forever. Mrs. Chen was behind the counter when Sophia came downstairs the next morning, carefully arranging jars of preserved fruit on a shelf. She looked up with a smile when Sophia entered. "You are going to see Mrs. Crawford today?" the older woman asked in her precise English. "She is good woman. Fair employer. Her son is good man too." "How did you know I was going?" Sophia asked, surprised. Mrs. Chen's smile widened. "Quentin stopped by yesterday evening, asked me to tell you that his mother would be expecting you whenever you wanted to come by. Also said to tell you that he apologizes if he spoke out of turn." Sophia felt that same flush of heat in her cheeks. "He did not speak out of turn," she said, then immediately wondered why she was defending him. "I mean, it does not matter. I am only interested in the work." "Of course, Mrs. Chen said, but her knowing look suggested she saw right through that claim. Crawford House sat on the western edge of Downieville, a large 2-story building with a wide front porch and smoke rising from 2 chimneys. The snow had been cleared from the walkway, and through the windows, Sophia could see warm lamplight glowing against the gray morning. She stood at the gate for a moment, gathering her courage, then walked up and knocked on the front door. The woman who answered was in her late 50s, with silver-streaked brown hair pulled back in a neat bun and the same slate-gray eyes as her son. She wore a simple dress covered by a white apron, and her hands were red and chapped from work. "You must be Miss Morgan," she said warmly. I am Quentin Crawford. Please, come in out of the cold." The inside of the boarding house was clean and well kept, with polished wood floors and simple but comfortable furniture. The smell of baking bread filled the air, and Sophia could hear voices from what must be the dining room. Her stomach clenched with memories, but she forced herself to breathe slowly and stay present. "Quentin said you might be looking for work," Quentin said, leading her toward the kitchen. "I will be honest with you, Miss Morgan. I am not as young as I used to be, and running this place is getting harder every year. I have 8 rooms, all currently occupied, and that means 3 meals a day for 8 boarders plus myself and Quentin when he is here. The work is hard, but I pay $2 a week plus room and board. You would have your own small room on the first floor, and Sundays off." $2 a week was more than Sophia had expected, more than she could earn doing laundry or mending. "What happened to your previous helper?" she asked. "Mary got married last fall and moved to her husband's ranch up near Sierra City. I have been managing alone since then, but I am afraid I am starting to fall behind." Quentin paused, studying Sophia with those sharp gray eyes. "Quentin told me you have been through something difficult. I will not pry into your past, but I need to know that you can handle the work and that you will stay for at least 6 months. I cannot afford to train someone only to have them leave after a few weeks." Sophia appreciated the directness. "I can handle the work," she said firmly. "And I have no plans to leave Downieville. I came here looking for a fresh start and I intend to stay." "Then the position is yours if you want it. When can you start?" "Tomorrow morning, if that suits you." Quentin's face broke into a genuine smile. "That suits me perfectly. Come by at 5 o'clock. We serve breakfast at 6, and I will show you the routine." They shook hands on it, and Sophia felt a strange sense of rightness settle over her as she walked back to the general store to pack her few belongings. This was not how she had imagined her life would turn out. 3 years ago, she had been engaged to a Philadelphia banker's son, planning a wedding and a future that seemed secure and predictable. Then the fire had come, and she had woken up in a hospital bed with her fiancé sitting beside her, looking at her burned arms and neck with barely concealed horror. He had broken their engagement 2 weeks later, citing concerns about her health and his family's reputation, and she had known that the real reason was written on her skin in scars that would never fully fade. But maybe that was all right. Maybe this new life in a small mountain town, working in a boarding house and keeping to herself, was exactly what she needed. And maybe, just maybe, not everyone would look at her the way her former fiancé had. She started work at Crawford House the next morning, arriving in the pre-dawn darkness to find Quentin already in the kitchen stoking the fire in the massive iron stove. The older woman showed her where everything was kept, explained the preferences of the various boarders, and demonstrated how she liked the bread kneaded and the coffee brewed. By the time the sun came up, Sophia was sweating despite the winter chill, her arms aching from kneading dough and her face flushed from the heat of the stove. The boarders came down for breakfast in 1s and 2s, most of them miners or merchants who worked in town. They were polite but curious, sneaking glances at Sophia as she served plates of eggs and bacon and thick slices of buttered bread. She kept her eyes down and her sleeves pulled low, focusing on the work and trying not to think about all those eyes on her. Quentin came down last, stamping snow from his boots in the hallway before entering the dining room. He had shaved since she last saw him, and his dark hair was still damp from washing. Their eyes met briefly across the room, and he nodded to her before taking his seat at the head of the table. "Boys, this is Miss Morgan," Quentin announced to the room. "She will be helping me run the house from now on, and I expect you all to treat her with respect. Anyone who does not can find somewhere else to live." There was a chorus of "Yes, madam," from the assembled men, and Sophia felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. Quentin Crawford was clearly not someone to be trifled with, and having her protection made this situation more bearable. The days fell into a rhythm. Sophia would rise before dawn to help Quentin with breakfast, then clean the boarders' rooms while they were out during the day. There was laundry to be done, meals to be cooked, floors to be swept and mopped, and 100 other small tasks that kept her busy from morning until night. By the time she fell into bed each evening in her small first-floor room, she was too exhausted to dream, and that was a blessing in itself. Quentin was often away during the day, checking on his cattle or helping other ranchers with their winter work. But he always returned for dinner, and Sophia found herself growing increasingly aware of his presence. He had a quiet way about him, speaking only when he had something worth saying, and he treated his mother with a gentle respect that spoke well of his character. He was kind to Sophia, too, thanking her for the meals and occasionally helping carry heavy pots or buckets without being asked. 3 weeks into her employment, a winter storm hit Downieville with a ferocity that kept everyone indoors for 2 full days. The snow piled up against the windows, and the wind howled through the eaves like a living thing. Sophia spent those days in the warm kitchen, baking bread and pies while Quentin taught her the secrets of making a stew that could feed 10 people on a budget that would barely feed 5. On the second afternoon of the storm, Sophia was alone in the kitchen rolling out pie crust when Quentin came in through the back door, bringing a blast of cold air and snow with him. He had been out checking on the animals in the small barn behind the house, and his coat was white with accumulated snowflakes. "You need help with anything?" he asked, hanging his coat on a peg by the door. "I am fine, thank you." Sophia focused on the dough, acutely aware of how small the kitchen suddenly felt with him in it. "My mother says you are the best help she has had in years," Quentin said, moving closer to warm his hands by the stove. "She has not looked this rested since Mary left." "Your mother is easy to work for," Sophia said honestly, "and the work keeps me occupied." "Is that what you wanted, to be occupied?" The question caught her off guard. She looked up to find him watching her with those thoughtful gray eyes, and for a moment she considered deflecting with a polite non-answer. But something about the storm-enforced intimacy of the moment made her want to be honest. "I wanted to disappear," she said quietly. "I wanted to find somewhere nobody knew me and nobody would ask questions about what happened to make me look like this." She gestured to her scarred neck without thinking, then immediately wished she had not. Quentin was silent for a long moment. Then he said, "Can I ask what did happen?" "You do not have to tell me if you do not want to." Sophia set down her rolling pin and looked at him directly. "There was a fire. A boarding house in Philadelphia where I was living. It was the middle of the night, and I woke up to find my room full of smoke and the hallway already burning. I tried to help get people out, but the fire was too strong and too fast. 12 people died. I got these," she touched her neck again, "from burning timber falling on me when part of the ceiling collapsed. The doctors said I was lucky that I did not die or lose full use of my arms. But when people look at me, all they see are the scars, and all I can think about are those 12 people who did not make it out." She had not meant to say so much, but once she started, the words poured out of her like water from a broken dam. Quentin listened without interrupting, his expression serious and attentive. When she finished, he moved closer, close enough that she could see the fine lines at the corners of his eyes and smell the pine soap he used. "You know what I see when I look at you?" he asked softly. Sophia shook her head, not trusting her voice. "I see someone brave enough to run into a burning building to help others. I see someone strong enough to survive something that would have broken most people. I see a woman who came west alone to start over, which takes more courage than most men I know possess." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was even gentler. "And I see someone beautiful, scars and all. Actually, not despite the scars. The scars are part of what makes you beautiful, because they are proof of everything you survived." Sophia felt tears prick her eyes, but they were not the bitter tears she had shed so many times before. These were different, softer somehow. "You do not have to say things like that," she whispered. "I am not saying it because I have to. I am saying it because it is true." Quentin reached out slowly, giving her plenty of time to pull away, and gently took her hand in his. He pushed back her sleeve with careful fingers, exposing the rippled scars that ran up her forearm. Then, holding her gaze, he lifted her hand and pressed a kiss to the worst of the scarred skin. The gesture was so unexpected, so tender, that Sophia felt something crack open in her chest. For 3 years, she had hidden these scars like shameful secrets, convinced that they made her unlovable and broken. But Quentin Crawford was looking at her like she was something precious, and kissing the parts of herself she hated most. And suddenly, she understood that maybe the problem had never been with her at all. Maybe the problem had been with people who could not see past the surface to the strength underneath. "I do not know what to say," she admitted. "You do not have to say anything." Quentin lowered her hand but did not let go. "I just wanted you to know that I see you, Sophia. The real you. And what I see is pretty damn close to perfect." Before she could respond, they heard Alina's footsteps on the stairs, and Quentin stepped back with a small smile. "I should let you get back to your baking, but if you want to talk more, my door is always open." He left through the kitchen door, and Sophia stood alone with her flour-dusted hands and her racing heart, trying to make sense of what had just happened. She had come to Downieville to hide, to be invisible, to live a quiet life where nobody looked too closely. But Quentin Crawford had looked closely, had seen all her damaged parts, and instead of turning away, he had called her perfect. The storm broke the next morning, leaving Downieville buried under 3 feet of fresh snow that sparkled like diamond dust in the winter sun. The boarders dug out the paths and roads, and life slowly returned to normal. But something had changed between Sophia and Quentin, a subtle shift that both of them felt but neither spoke about directly. He started finding small excuses to be in the kitchen when she was working, offering to chop vegetables or carry heavy pots. She caught herself listening for his footsteps and looking up whenever the back door opened. Alina noticed, of course, and Sophia sometimes caught the older woman watching them with an expression that was equal parts knowing and pleased. February arrived with more snow and temperatures so cold that the water in the wash basin froze overnight. Sophia had been working at Crawford House for nearly 2 months, and she felt more settled than she had since before the fire. The nightmares still came occasionally, but they were less frequent and less intense. The work kept her busy and gave her purpose, and Alina had become something like a friend, sharing stories of the early mining days and teaching Sophia skills her mother had never bothered with. And then, there was Quentin. He was unlike any man she had ever known, quiet and steady and completely comfortable in his own skin. He did not fill silence with empty chatter, but when he spoke, his words carried weight. He was gentle with animals and respectful to everyone he met, but there was a core of strength in him that suggested he could be formidable when necessary. Sophia found herself thinking about him at odd moments, remembering the way he had kissed her scarred hand and called her perfect. She had been proposed to once before, had thought herself in love with her Philadelphia fiancé, but that pale emotion was nothing compared to what she was starting to feel for Quentin Crawford. This was deeper and more real, rooted in genuine seeing and understanding rather than surface attraction. One Sunday in mid-February, Alina insisted that Sophia take her day off and actually leave the house instead of spending it doing extra chores. "You need fresh air and sunshine," the older woman said firmly. "Go for a walk, visit the shops, do something that is not work." Sophia bundled up in her warmest clothes and set out into the crisp winter morning. The town was quiet on Sundays, most people either at church or resting at home. She wandered through the streets, looking in shop windows and nodding to the few people she passed. She was examining a display of ribbons in the mercantile window when she heard a familiar voice behind her. "Those blue ones would look nice with your coloring." She turned to find Quentin standing a few feet away, dressed in his Sunday best, which meant clean trousers and a shirt without any patches. His dark hair was neatly combed, and he was holding his hat in his hands. "I did not know you came into town on Sundays," Sophia said, pleased despite herself. "I usually help my mother with the boarders, but she insisted I take the day off too. Said something about how we both work too hard." He moved closer, falling into step beside her as she continued down the street. "Have you eaten lunch yet?" "No, I was planning to get something from one of the vendors. There is a new restaurant that opened last month. The food is supposed to be decent, and it would be nice to eat something I did not have to cook or watch someone else cook. Would you like to join me?" It was clearly an invitation, a deliberate choice to spend time together outside the boarding house. Sophia knew she could refuse, could keep their relationship professional and distant, but she did not want to. For the first time in 3 years, she wanted to take a risk. "I would like that," she said. The restaurant was small and warm, with checkered tablecloths and the smell of roasted meat in the air. The proprietor, a cheerful woman named Mrs. Walsh, seated them by the window and brought them coffee without being asked. Quentin ordered stew for both of them, and they sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the snow fall gently outside. "Can I ask you something?" Sophia said finally. "Why did you come looking for me that first day in the woods? Mrs. Chen could have just told me about the job." Quentin considered the question, turning his coffee cup in his hands. "Honestly, because I had seen you walking out there every morning for a week and I was curious. You looked so solitary, so determined to be alone. It reminded me of myself a few years back." "What happened a few years back?" "I got engaged to a girl I had known since childhood, Emma Bennett. We had been planning to get married, build a house up in the high country, start a family. Then she met a lawyer from Sacramento who came through town, and suddenly I was not good enough anymore. She wanted city life and fancy things, and I could not give her that. She broke it off a month before the wedding." Sophia reached across the table and touched his hand. "I am sorry, that must have been terrible. It was at the time, but looking back, I think we would have been miserable together. We wanted different things, and I was too stubborn to see it. After she left, I spent about 6 months feeling sorry for myself and avoiding people. It was my mother who finally snapped me out of it. She told me that hiding from the world was not going to change what happened, and that I was wasting my life being angry at someone who had already moved on. She sounds like a wise woman. She is, and she was right. So I stopped hiding and started living again." He turned his hand over so their palms were touching. "When I saw you in those woods, looking like you were carrying the weight of the world on your shoulders, I recognized that same need to disappear. I thought maybe you could use someone telling you what my mother told me, which is that you are stronger than whatever happened to you, and that the world is better with you in it than without you." The stew arrived then, saving Sophia from having to respond around the lump in her throat. They ate slowly, talking about small things and comfortable things, and by the time they finished, The afternoon sun was slanting through the windows at a low angle. Quentin walked her back to the boarding house, and they stood together on the front porch in the gathering dusk. The lights inside glowed warmly, and they could hear Alina singing to herself in the kitchen. "Thank you for lunch," Sophia said, "and for the conversation. Thank you for giving me a chance." Quentin hesitated, then said, "Sophia, I do not want to rush you or make you uncomfortable. But I would like to spend more time with you like this, away from the boarding house. Would that be all right with you?" She knew what he was really asking. He wanted to court her properly, to see if this growing connection between them could become something more. Part of her wanted to say no, to protect herself from the possibility of being hurt again. But a larger part, the part that had been slowly coming back to life over the past 2 months, wanted to say yes. "That would be more than all right," she said softly. His smile was like sunrise, slow and warm and full of light. "Good. Then I will see you at breakfast tomorrow, and we can figure out when you have your next free afternoon." He tipped his hat to her and headed off into the dusk, and Sophia went inside feeling lighter than she had in years. Alina was indeed in the kitchen, and she looked up with a knowing smile when Sophia entered. "Did you have a nice day off?" "I did. Thank you for insisting I take it." "That boy has been sweet on you since the day he met you," Alina said matter-of-factly, returning her attention to the soup she was stirring. "I have not seen him this interested in anyone since that Bennett girl broke his heart. It does my soul good to see him happy again." "We are just getting to know each other," Sophia protested, but she could not keep the smile off her face. "Of course you are, and I am just an old woman who does not notice anything." Alina's eyes twinkled with amusement. "But for what it is worth, I think you are good for him. And I think he is good for you too." Over the following weeks, Quentin and Sophia fell into a pattern of stolen moments and careful courtship. He would find excuses to help her in the kitchen, and she would save him extra portions of his favorite dishes. On her days off, they would go for walks through the snowy town or share meals at the little restaurant. He told her about growing up in the Sierra Nevada, about learning to rope cattle and survive mountain winters. She told him about Philadelphia, about the life she had left behind and the person she was trying to become. The other boarders noticed, of course. It was impossible to hide the way Quentin looked at her, or the soft expression that crossed her face when he entered a room. But they were respectful about it, offering teasing remarks that were good-natured rather than cruel. Even the miners, rough men who spent their days underground chasing elusive gold, were careful to mind their language around her and treat her with courtesy. In early March, the weather started to warm slightly, and the deep snow began its slow transformation into mud and slush. Quentin took Sophia to see his cattle, a small herd that he kept in a meadow a few miles outside town. They rode together on his bay horse, Sophia sitting in front of him with his arms around her to hold the reins, and she felt safer than she had in years. The cattle were shaggy with winter coats, their breath steaming in the cold air. Quentin pointed out each one, telling her their individual personalities and quirks with the fondness of someone who genuinely cared about his animals. Sophia watched him as he talked, taking in the animation in his face and the pride in his voice, and felt her heart expand with affection. "You really love this life," she observed. "I do. I know it is not fancy or glamorous, but it suits me, working with animals, being outside, feeling like I am part of something bigger than myself." He looked at her seriously. "I need you to understand that this is who I am, Sophia. I am never going to be rich or important. I am just a rancher trying to make a decent living." "That is exactly who I want you to be," she said. "I had rich and important once, and it turned out to be worthless when things got hard. I would much rather have honest and kind." He kissed her then, soft and careful, giving her every chance to pull away. But Sophia leaned into the kiss instead, her gloved hands coming up to frame his face. It was her first kiss since the fire, and it felt like coming home to a place she had never been before. When they finally broke apart, both slightly breathless, Quentin rested his forehead against hers. "I am falling in love with you," he said quietly. "I probably should not tell you that so soon, but I have never been good at hiding what I feel." "Good," Sophia whispered. "Because I am falling in love with you too." They stayed in the meadow until the sun started to set, talking and kissing and making plans for a future that was starting to feel possible. When they rode back to town, Sophia felt like a different person than the one who had arrived in Downieville 3 months ago. That woman had been broken and hiding, convinced that her life was essentially over. This woman was hopeful and healing, ready to believe in second chances. Spring came slowly to the Sierra Nevada, the snow melting in fits and starts as warm days alternated with sudden cold snaps. Sophia had been working at Crawford House for 4 months, and it had become more of a home than a workplace. Eleanor treated her like a daughter, and the boarders had accepted her as part of the household. And Quentin was a constant, steady presence, loving her with a patience and tenderness that made her believe she truly was perfect, scars and all. In late April, with wildflowers starting to bloom in the high meadows, Quentin asked Sophia to marry him. He did it simply and directly, with no grand gestures or elaborate speeches, standing in the kitchen after breakfast while she was washing dishes. "I love you," he said. "I want to spend my life with you, building something good together. Will you marry me, Sophia Morgan?" She turned from the sink, her hands dripping soapy water, and looked at this man who had seen her at her lowest and chosen to see beauty instead of damage. "Yes," she said, and then louder, "Yes, I will marry you." Eleanor cried happy tears and insisted on hosting the wedding at the boarding house. The ceremony took place in early June when the mountains were at their most beautiful, carpeted with flowers and bright with new growth. Sophia wore a simple white dress that Mrs. Chen helped her sew, with long sleeves that covered her scars but somehow no longer felt like hiding. Quentin wore his best suit, and he cried when he saw her walking toward him. They were married by the circuit preacher in front of the assembled boarders and half the town. When Quentin said, "I do," his voice was strong and sure. When Sophia repeated the words, she meant them with every fiber of her being. The reception lasted into the evening, with music and dancing and more food than seemed possible. Sophia danced with her new husband under the stars, feeling the solid warmth of his body against hers, and thinking about how far she had come. 3 years ago, she had been pulled from a burning building more dead than alive. 2 years ago, she had been broken and alone, convinced that her life had no purpose. 1 year ago, she had been adrift, searching for somewhere to belong. Now she was Sophia Crawford, married to a man who loved her completely, living in a town that had become home. The scars were still there, would always be there, but they no longer defined her. They were simply part of her story, proof that she had survived the fire and everything that came after. Quentin and Sophia moved into a small cabin that he had been building on his land. A cozy place with 2 rooms and a fireplace that kept them warm on cool mountain nights. Eleanor gave them her blessing and a generous wedding gift, and they settled into married life with the easy comfort of people who genuinely liked each other as much as they loved each other. The first summer was busy. Quentin worked long hours with his cattle, and Sophia helped him while also maintaining a small garden and preserving food for the winter. They would work side by side during the day, then fall into bed exhausted at night, only to wake with the dawn and do it all again. It was hard work, but it was satisfying work, and Sophia found joy in the simple rhythms of ranch life. In the evenings, They would sit on their small porch and watch the sun set over the mountains, talking about their days and making plans for the future. Quentin wanted to expand his herd and build a bigger house. Sophia wanted to learn to ride better and maybe start raising chickens. They both wanted children, though they agreed to wait a year or two until they were more established. The first real test of their marriage came in November, when Sophia woke screaming from a nightmare about the fire. It was the worst one she had in months, vivid and terrifying, leaving her shaking and gasping in the darkness. Quentin woke instantly, pulling her into his arms and holding her until the terror passed. "I am sorry," she whispered against his chest. "I thought they were getting better." "Do not apologize. You survived something terrible, Sophia. It makes sense that your mind still processes it sometimes." He stroked her hair gently. "Do you want to talk about it?" She did, and he listened without judgment or platitudes, just holding her and letting her speak until the words ran dry. When she finally fell back asleep, she knew with absolute certainty that she had chosen the right man. Winter came again, and with it more snow and cold. But this year, Sophia faced it with Quentin beside her and a home of her own to shelter in. They spent the long, dark evenings reading to each other by firelight, playing cards, and making love with an intensity that seemed to grow rather than fade with time. Quentin still told her she was beautiful, still kissed her scars like they were precious things, and Sophia finally, truly began to believe him. In February, she discovered she was pregnant. The realization came slowly, a gradual awareness of changes in her body that eventually became undeniable. She told Quentin one morning while he was getting ready to check on the cattle, and the look of pure joy on his face made her cry happy tears. "We are going to have a baby," he said wonderingly, dropping to his knees and pressing his ear against her still flat belly. "A real baby." "That is generally how it works," Sophia teased, running her fingers through his hair. He looked up at her with such love that it took her breath away. "You are going to be an amazing mother. You are going to be an amazing father." They told Alina next, and the older woman was thrilled at the prospect of becoming a grandmother. She immediately began knitting baby clothes and offering advice based on her own experience raising Quentin. The boarders at Crawford House were equally excited, treating Sophia like fragile glass whenever she visited town. The pregnancy was relatively easy, though Sophia tired more quickly than usual and had strange cravings for pickles and strawberry preserves at odd hours. Quentin was attentive to the point of being overprotective, constantly checking on her and refusing to let her do any heavy lifting. It drove her crazy sometimes, but it also made her feel cherished and safe. In late September, 2 days before her 24th birthday, Sophia went into labor. Alina came to stay with them, and together she and Quentin helped Sophia through the long hours of pain and effort. The local midwife, Mrs. Davis, arrived around midnight and took charge with the calm efficiency of someone who had delivered hundreds of babies. Just after dawn, as the sun was painting the sky pink and gold, Sophia gave birth to a son. He was small but healthy, with a full head of dark hair and lungs that worked perfectly, as evidenced by his immediate and loud complaints about being expelled from the womb. Quentin cut the cord with shaking hands, then gathered his wife and son into his arms with tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect," he whispered, "just like his mother." They named him Thomas, after Quentin's father who had died before Sophia came to Downieville. Thomas Crawford was a happy baby, quick to smile and relatively easy to soothe. Sophia discovered that she loved being a mother, even with the exhaustion and the endless cycle of feeding and diaper changes. Watching Quentin with their son was even better, seeing this strong rancher become soft and gentle with the tiny human they had created together. Life fell into a new rhythm, centered around Thomas and the changing seasons. Quentin expanded his herd as he had planned, and Sophia kept the house and raised their son with Alina's help and advice. They had less time for themselves now, but the stolen moments became all the more precious for their rarity. Thomas was 6 months old when Sophia finally removed her long sleeves on a hot summer day, working in the garden with her scarred arms bare to the sunshine. Quentin came home to find her that way and smiled so wide it looked like it hurt. "What?" she asked, self-conscious despite herself. "I am just happy to see you comfortable in your own skin," he said, kissing her temple. "You have come so far." He was right. She had come so far from the terrified, scarred woman who had arrived in Downieville nearly 3 years ago. The scars had not disappeared, would never disappear, but they had faded both physically and emotionally. She rarely thought about them anymore, and when people stared, it bothered her less and less. More important than that, she had built a life she was proud of. She had a husband who loved her unconditionally, a son who brought her more joy than she had thought possible, a mother-in-law who had become true family, and a place in a community that had accepted her without reservation. She had work that mattered and a future that stretched out bright and full of possibility. That fall, on a crisp October morning when Thomas was learning to crawl and getting into everything, Sophia was working in the kitchen when she heard Quentin's horse outside. She looked out the window and saw him riding up fast, which was unusual. He normally moved at a more leisurely pace unless there was trouble. He burst through the door with a huge grin on his face. "We got it," he said, sweeping her into a spinning hug. "The Peterson Ranch. They accepted my offer." Sophia knew he had been negotiating to buy the land adjacent to their property, which would more than double their grazing area and allow them to significantly expand their herd. It was a big investment, one they had been discussing for months, weighing the risks against the potential rewards. "Are you sure we can manage it?" she asked, even as she hugged him back. "I am sure. It will be hard work, but we can do it. And it means we can really build something here, something to pass on to Thomas and any other children we might have." He pulled back to look at her seriously. "You are all right with this, with staying here long-term and growing roots?" "I am more than all right with it. This is home now, Quentin. For better or worse, you are stuck with me in Downieville." They celebrated that night after Thomas was asleep, making love slowly and quietly in their bed, whispering plans and dreams into the darkness. Sophia thought about that first winter morning when she had stood at the edge of town, watching snow fall and trying to disappear. If someone had told her then that she would find love and happiness and belonging in this small mountain town, she would never have believed them. But life had a way of surprising you. The worst thing imaginable had happened to her in Philadelphia, and it had led her to the best thing possible here in California. She had learned that scars were not signs of weakness, but proof of strength, that being broken did not mean staying broken, and that the right person would see beauty in all your damaged places. The years passed in the way that happy years do, quickly and quietly, marked by small milestones rather than dramatic events. They bought the Peterson Ranch and worked hard to make it profitable. Thomas grew into a bright, curious boy who loved following his father around and helping with the animals. Alina aged gracefully, eventually selling Crawford House to a young couple and moving into a small cottage on Quentin and Sophia's expanded property so she could be close to her grandson. When Thomas was 3, Sophia became pregnant again. This time it was a daughter, born during a spring rainstorm with her father's gray eyes and her mother's dark hair. They named her Rose, and she was just as perfect as her brother. 2 years after that came another son, Henry, who was quieter than his siblings but no less loved. Quentin and Sophia built a bigger house to accommodate their growing family, a sturdy two-story structure with a wide porch and room for everyone. The old cabin became a guest house, and Alina helped Sophia plant gardens that provided vegetables and flowers in abundance. The ranch prospered under Quentin's careful management. He gained a reputation as an honest dealer and a skilled rancher, and other cattle owners often came to him for advice. Sophia kept the books and managed the household, and between them, they built something stable and good. Thomas was 10, Rose was 7, and Henry was 5 when Sophia received a letter from Philadelphia. It was from her former fiancé's sister, a woman Sophia had once considered a friend. The letter explained that the brother had died of pneumonia the previous winter, and before his death, he had spoken of Sophia with regret. He had asked his sister to reach out and tell Sophia that he was sorry for how he had treated her, that he had let his own fears and his family's prejudices blind him to her worth. Sophia read the letter twice, sitting at her kitchen table while her children played outside and Quentin worked in the barn. She felt a complicated mix of emotions: sadness for a life cut short, vindication that he had realized his mistake, and mostly, a sort of distant pity. He had let fear control him, and he had died regretting it. She had let courage control her, and she had built a life beyond anything she could have imagined. When Quentin came in for lunch, she showed him the letter. He read it carefully, then looked at her with concern. "How do you feel about this?" he asked, sad for him. "Grateful that I did not end up married to someone who could only love me when things were easy. Thankful that I came west and found you instead." She took his hand, rough and calloused from work. "Everything I went through led me here, to you and our children and this life. I would not change any of it, not even the fire, because changing it might mean losing this." Quentin pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "You are the strongest person I know," he said against her hair, "and the most beautiful. And I thank God every day that you walked into those woods and I was brave enough to follow." Sophia looked around her kitchen, at the life she had built from ashes and pain and determination. Through the window, she could see Thomas teaching Rose how to rope a fence post while Henry toddled after them. Beyond that were the mountains that had sheltered and healed her, and the town that had given her a second chance. The scars were still there, visible on her arms whenever she rolled up her sleeves to work, but they no longer defined her. She was Sophia Crawford, wife, mother, rancher, survivor. The snow had covered her scars that first winter, but Quentin had seen her beauty anyway, had looked past the damage to the person underneath. He had told her she was perfect, and after years of believing him, she finally knew it was true. Not perfect in the sense of flawless or unmarked, but perfect in the sense of being exactly who she was meant to be, scars and all. Perfect in the sense of having survived the fire and built something beautiful from the ashes. Perfect in the sense of being loved completely and loving completely in return. That evening, after the children were in bed and the dishes were washed, Sophia and Quentin sat together on their porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. It was one of those perfect mountain evenings when the air was soft and the light was golden and everything felt exactly right. "Do you ever miss Philadelphia?" Quentin asked, his arm around her shoulders. Sophia thought about it seriously before answering. "I miss the person I was before the fire sometimes. The innocent girl who thought tragedy was something that happened to other people, but I do not miss the life I would have had there. That was never really my life. This is my life, here with you." "Good," he said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Because I plan on keeping you here for the next 50 years at least." "Only 50, she teased. "Well, maybe 60. We will see how things go." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun slipped below the mountains and the first stars appeared in the darkening sky. Inside, Alina was reading to the children from her rocking chair, and Sophia could hear their sleepy questions and her patient answers. The cattle were settled in the meadow, the horses were bedded down in the barn, and the garden was growing strong and green. It was an ordinary evening, the kind that made up the bulk of a life. But to Sophia it was extraordinary, a gift she had never expected to receive. She had survived the fire and the pain and the long dark period that followed. She had traveled west alone, had found work and shelter, had met a cowboy who saw past her scars to the woman beneath, and he had looked at her with love in his eyes and said the words that changed everything. "You are perfect." Years later, when Thomas was preparing to take over the ranch, and Rose was courting a young lawyer from Sacramento, and Henry was planning to go east to study medicine, Sophia would think back on that first winter in Downieville. She would remember the cold and the loneliness, and the feeling that her life was essentially over. And she would marvel at how wrong she had been. Her life had not ended in that Philadelphia fire. It had been reborn in the Sierra Nevada mountains, in a small town where snow covered her scars and a cowboy saw her beauty. Everything that came after, all the love and joy and hard-won happiness, had grown from that single moment of connection. She and Quentin grew old together, their love deepening with the years rather than fading. They watched their children grow and have children of their own. They expanded the ranch, weathered droughts and hard winters, celebrated victories and mourned losses. Through it all, they remained partners in the truest sense, working side by side to build something that would last long after they were gone. On their 40th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children and grandchildren, Quentin gave a toast that made everyone cry. "To my wife," he said, raising his glass, "who taught me that beauty has nothing to do with perfection and everything to do with courage, who took the worst thing that ever happened to her and turned it into strength, who agreed to marry a simple cowboy and build a life in these mountains. Sophia, you are perfect today just as you were perfect the first day I met you, and you will be perfect every day until the end of time." Sophia stood and kissed him, not caring that their grandchildren were giggling and their children were getting misty-eyed. "And you," she said, "are the man who saved my life by seeing me when I was trying so hard to be invisible. I love you, Quentin Crawford, today and always." It was, everyone agreed, the best anniversary party Downieville had ever seen. More years passed. Alina died peacefully in her sleep at the age of 87, content in the knowledge that her son had built a good life and her grandchildren were thriving. Thomas married a schoolteacher and took over the ranch, running it with the same careful attention his father had shown. Rose surprised everyone by declining the lawyer's proposal, and instead marrying a Chinese merchant's son, scandalizing some of the older residents but earning her parents' full support. Henry went to medical school as planned, and eventually returned to open a practice in Downieville, caring for the same community that had welcomed his mother decades earlier. Quentin and Sophia moved into the old cabin, giving the main house to Thomas and his growing family. They spent their days helping with the grandchildren, working in the garden, and enjoying the peace that came with age and accomplishment. Quentin's hair went silver, and Sophia's scars faded to pale lines that hardly showed unless you looked closely. But they still loved each other with the same intensity they had felt as young newlyweds, still held hands while watching sunsets, still thanked God for the day. Sophia walked into those snowy woods and Quentin followed her there. On a summer evening when Sophia was 71 years old, she sat on the cabin porch watching her great-grandchildren play in the yard. Quentin dozed beside her, his hand clasped in hers, his breathing slow and steady. The mountains rose purple and gold in the distance, eternal and unchanging, and she felt a deep sense of peace. She thought about the long journey that had brought her here, from Philadelphia to Downieville, from broken to whole, from hiding to being seen. She thought about the fire that had scarred her body but ultimately freed her spirit. She thought about the cowboy who had looked past the damage and seen beauty, who had loved her perfectly and completely for more than 50 years. And she thought about how the snow had covered her scars that first winter, making everything clean and new, giving her a chance to start over. How Quentin had seen her beauty despite the scars, or perhaps because of them, understanding that the marks of survival were nothing to hide. How he had said those 3 simple words that changed the course of her life. "You are perfect." The sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in colors that had no names, and Sophia Crawford smiled. She had been given a second chance at life, and she had not wasted a single moment of it. She had loved deeply, worked hard, raised good children, and built something that would last long after she was gone. Her scars had faded but never disappeared. They were still there, pale reminders of the fire that had tried to destroy her but ultimately made her stronger. She wore them now without shame or self-consciousness, proof that she had survived the worst and built the best from its ashes. Quentin stirred beside her, waking from his nap with a smile. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, his voice rough with sleep and age. "How lucky I am," Sophia said simply. "How grateful I am that the snow brought me to you." "I am the lucky one," he insisted, as he always did. "You made my life perfect, Sophia Crawford." "No," she corrected gently, squeezing his hand. "We made each other's lives perfect, together." And as the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, as their great-grandchildren's laughter drifted up from the yard, as the mountains stood watch over the valley they had called home for more than 50 years, Sophia knew with absolute certainty that it was true. Their love story had started with snow and scars, and a cowboy brave enough to see beauty where others saw only damage. It had grown into something beautiful and lasting, a testament to the power of acceptance and understanding and unconditional love. The snow had covered her scars. The cowboy had seen her beauty. And together, they had built a perfect life in the Wild West, exactly as it was always meant to be.